Have you ever wondered whether the problems in the world today would exist if we had deeper connection to ourselves, others, and the environment and acted from that place?
Welcome to the Conscious Action Podcast with your hosts Brian Berneman and Kayla Greenville, who believe that connection is the key to taking conscious action as individuals and creating a better world.
We are here to raise awareness and inspire meaningful action by sharing stories, knowledge, and conversations with thought leaders and change makers.
From sustainability to well-being and everything related to conscious living, our mission is to empower you to be the change that you want to see in the world. Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Conscious Action Podcast. I am Brian Berneman, your host, and I have the pleasure to be joined all the way from Ottawa in Canada by Ryan Fahey. Thank you, Ryan, so much for taking the time and to share with me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you. So for everyone that is listening to us, what can you share about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brian. And for your listeners, good day wherever you're tuning in from. Welcome to the show. I'm excited to be here. This has been a long time coming. I know, Brian, you and I connected a while back on this, and just really excited to be a part of your show. Love your show and love what you do and the folks that you've brought on. So, as Brian mentioned, my name is Ryan. A little bit about me, I guess, if we were in an elevator. Hopefully, maybe we're going up to the Burj Khalifa, so this might take a little while, but I guess we were in an elevator together, Brian. A little bit about me. I'm a husband. I've been married just over 4 years. We just celebrated our 4-year anniversary, which has been amazing. I grew up in Eastern Canada. So for any of your listeners who are familiar with Canada, I grew up on the East Coast in a province called Nova Scotia. And when I was 12 years old, I was diagnosed with chronic migraines. And, I grew up, just to kind of paint this picture a little bit, I grew up in a really small town, small school, a really close community, and a great family. And, so when this was all happening to me at 12 years old, I didn't really know why am I getting these migraines and what's happening? And it was kind of beyond the healthcare professionals in my town as well. And so I ended up being part of this research study through a local university. And throughout the study, basically what they had me do at 12 years old was kind of track your physical activity, your eating, and your sleep habits. And then we kind of want to see if there's anything that might be triggering these migraines. And so what happened, to make a long story short, at the end of that study, that I realized that the days I was physically active, I was least likely, if not at all, going to get these migraines. And so at 12 years old, that was really foundational for me to understand in terms of my own self-awareness that, when I move, when I move, everything gets better, right? My eating, my sleeping, I don't get these headaches, I feel better. And so, fast forwarding now into adulthood, I've made a career out of working in the wellness and education industries. It's kind of propelled me into now being a business owner in terms of what I offer with my business. And of course, more recently into authorship with my 3 books. So it's been quite a wild ride, but wellness, I guess, is kind of a big part of who I am in my day-to-day and in my work and vocation and my writing. So really happy to be here, and hopefully today we can share some things for your listeners that definitely provide some value for them.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And, I think that it's really interesting, the fact that for many people, well-being, it's not the most important thing, and we haven't, our civilization, our societies are not having that as the focal point. And a lot of times I'm like, well, that's the beginning of everything. If we are not well, in a sense, what's the point? What's the point of working tirelessly? What's the point of having a lot of challenges if we are not well to even, making money for what? For not enjoying it, or different things like that. And I think that, the more that we can bring well-being into people's awareness so that they actually start to realize, oh, this is actually important and I need to make this a priority, I need to make myself a priority, then that creates a shift on how people also live their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're 100% spot on, Brian. And I think, a lot of times when we kind of go through the traditional school system and even college or university, we're kind of, a lot of what we do is based on merit, right? So you do this and then you achieve these things. But along that way, if wellness isn't foundational to the learning or to the way of being, then all of a sudden you arrive at this destination of adulthood, and what's the trade-off, right? Well, say you're making great money or you've pursued a great career, but you're 20 pounds overweight, or, internally you just don't feel well. These are things that it's almost like it's too late in a lot of cases for people to kind of step back, or maybe they get to a point where they step back and say, I wish I knew this sooner, right?
Mm,
And, with my story, it was really unfortunate at 12 years old what I had to go through, but at the same time, it's almost really good for me now because I've been able to, have a career that and work for a company that values wellness. I've been able to really, provide strategies and help other people through my books and writing. And so I'm really grateful for that. But I know a lot of times, again, we just, to your point, if we don't value it as a society in our education system and in how we look at careers and salaries and things like that, then, we can really set ourselves up for, not a great situation, right? So yeah, it's definitely a really important part of my life, and hopefully can be a bigger conversation for folks out there too.
yes, yes. And Ryan, would you mind sharing a little bit on like, did you always wanted to be a writer? Like, how about writing 3 books? Like, what was the process? Why did you do that? And what has been the journey of writing those books?
Yeah, great question. So to start, I guess when I was in university, I started a blog, and this is going to date me a little bit, but it was when Blogspot was a big deal. And so it was terrible, by the way, the platform, and my blog wasn't great, but I thought it was, amazing. But it was called Wellness Network Blog. And I think it still exists actually. But, I just really started with, again, writing about wellness, right? So it was a lot of personal growth stuff, kind of, setting smart goals, things like that. And that blog really existed, I think, from about 2009 to about maybe 2013. And I always said to myself, I want to write because I want to write. I don't want to write out of expectation or obligation. And the blog was starting to turn into that for me. And I was
Mm,
going through some transitions from university to my career. And so I decided to shut down that blog. And it kind of took me about a couple of years, I'd say, a bit of a break there. And it wasn't really until about 2016, maybe 2015, when I started thinking about a book. And I thought, I'm really getting the urge to write again. I had a blog for a while, and maybe it's time to venture into becoming an author. And so I really started that in 2016. I was driving to this northern community in Canada, and it just hit me on, this is the book I want to write, and these are the chapters that I want to write about. So I pulled the car over. I got out my journal. I just started writing down all of the chapters as they were coming to me. And even though that was 2016, it took me another 2 years to actually write that book because, I had, my confidence had to match my competence. I was like scared to press send, and, all those things with imposter syndrome that were popping up, and I was young. And anyways, it took me a while, but in 2018, I finally, published one, and then I published another one right after it. And yeah, really it just kind of took off from there. But it was a lot of years of just incubating and thinking about it, and not really fully being able to press the button. And so I'm also grateful for that time. I grew a lot as a writer. But yeah, just from there, it's been incredible. And I've recently, even today, I started writing my next one. So it's a lot of fun when you dive in. It gets a little bit easier every time.
mhm.
But yeah, it was a learning journey for sure.
Yeah. So for everyone listening, can you share what are the topics or the themes of your books? And
Yeah.
especially as well, this latest one that you're writing, if you can share that.
Yeah, great question. So, my first one was titled Thought Leadership. And what that one was, it was a collection of articles. Right when I was getting ready to publish my second book, I was writing a lot on Medium, which is a platform for freelance writers. I totally recommend that if folks out there want to dabble in writing. It's a great tool. And so I was writing for some of the largest publications on there. So the Startup, I think it had more followers at the time than the Washington Post, and a few other kind of large business and entrepreneurship article or publications. So I ended up compiling those into this book called Thought Leadership. And it was more about kind of, how do we think about our lives? How do we structure our lives and maybe think about things a little bit differently than school teaches us? It was a bit more of an abstract type book. And I kept it as an ebook, just to kind of test the waters and see what that process was like. But the second book, which was really the one that launched me, was called Your Best Decade. And that one focuses on kind of our 10-year lifespan, whatever that 10 years looks like for the reader, and really focuses on how can we be at our best relationally, personally, and professionally over those 10 years. And the reason for that one was, there was a lot of books out there with like life hacks and, do this, your best day, or, your best life or whatever. But I was like, okay, well, what if we look at this from a 10-year standpoint? And what if we looked at these big 3 buckets, right, that impact all of us? And so, in that book, I talk a lot about, legacy and having a legacy that's greater than a resume. And what does that look like? I talk a lot about, taking a values-based approach to our wellness. So a lot of times when people are setting a fitness or health goal, they think about, I'm going to lose 10 pounds or I'm going to stop smoking or whatever that is. But we don't take the time to step back from that and really establish like what are our top 3 to 5 values. And then how can we live in accordance to those values, right? So if I value a healthy marriage, I'm going to act in a way that, hopefully creates and sustains a healthy marriage, right? And so I really challenge the reader in that book in those big 3 areas to step back and think about the values with wherever they're at in their lives, so that then they can go into action and intention. And so that was the second one. The third one is called How to Thrive in Remote Working Environments. And that one really spawned out of COVID-19, right? And, like you there in New Zealand and me here in Canada, I know we were talking about this beforehand, but, the world was kind of thrown into this. And I think a lot of people that traditionally had office settings and even in schools and healthcare jobs were now suddenly remote overnight. And it was like, okay, now let's figure this out, right? And what I noticed at the time, again, back to the idea of wellness in my life, is that, even I was struggling. And I'm like, well, if I'm struggling, I'm sure other people are really struggling. And I did a quick search on Amazon to see, what's out there to support the well-being of remote workers. And there was really only one book I could find, and it's a really good book. It's called Remote by Jason Fried. But there wasn't really much. And so that's when I decided to sit down, put pen to paper, and write this third book, really to help support remote workers to kind of move from a state of survival to a state of thriving. What does that look like over the long haul? So really giving practical tips for those folks, regardless of where they're at in the world and what work that they do. So that was kind of the third one. The fourth one, I can be a little more abstract here, Brian, maybe on this one, just because it's so new.
Yeah.
But, essentially this one I think is going to be more about how do we listen to our life a little bit more? Because, a lot of times with social media and just the pace of the world and how fast things are moving, we tend to move forward out of reaction, and we tend to move forward and pursue things out of, thinking, but what is our heart telling us, and how do we get back in touch with that? And so that's really what this next one, I believe, is going to be about. And yes, stay tuned for more. Maybe next season, I can come back on and share that one with you for sure.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's very interesting. I want to touch on a few things that you mentioned from the books, because I think that it's so important. One is, and I do this a lot with my students and my clients, it's actually taking the time to write down what are our values, what are the things that we stand for, what are the things that we care about, because most people have no idea. Most people are living their lives without understanding why they are doing the things that they are doing, what's not only their belief system, but actually, like what are the things that matter. And then once doing that, it's like, well, now that I know I care about this, how are my actions aligned with that? Or for most people, how they are not? And what do I need to do to, like, to bring that place of alignment again in my life? Because yes, there's a lot of like challenges if I, whether it is that I now know it or even if it's unconscious, if I care about certain things and then I'm behaving in a very different way, of course there's going to be this noise or this discordant feeling because I'm not in an alignment with what I want, with who I am and the things that I care about. So as a starting point, and then I'll ask you about some of the other things. What are the things that you share with people around this topic?
Yeah, really good question. And I think what you're absolutely right. First of all, that a lot of folks, again, through education and through our upbringing and whatnot, we haven't taken the time or made space to think about what is it we value. And then our lives change, right? So like my values right now at 33, maybe they're different at 43, maybe they're different at 53. And so doing it, a constant maybe evaluation of those is really, really important. So that's something that I share quite a bit for folks, that just because you're narrowing in on these values doesn't mean they're static, right? Like, you can narrow in and then in 5 years or 3 years, you can change them. But I'd say the first strategy that I use is really, I say, what are your 3 to 5? Because it can easily get overwhelming for folks, as I'm sure with your work too, right? It can be overwhelming for folks to say, okay, I didn't have any, now I got to come up with 10, right? And even 5 can be very daunting. But what I find too is that, once you say that 3 to 5 and you get to 3, it's very easy to get to 5 for folks, because then they start to really dig in and they're like, oh yeah, I really do value this. So that's really where I start. And then one of the other things I really recommend, and I've done this recently with some university students, is get them to sign their own personal values declaration. So once they've established their values, I talk after that about living fully with intention. And this is something that I talk about in Your Best Decade. And that, you want to be fully intentional with those values. And if you're not, that doesn't make you a bad person. It's an area of improvement. So we talked about that. And then we sign off on this values declaration. So, I declare that Ryan Fahey is going to live according to these values for the next 6 to 12 months. And so basically a personal commitment, right? And as you know, with folks, like, it's important that we're accountable to something. And so this is making them accountable to themselves, not to me, not to anyone else, but to themselves. And so I find that that's a very effective strategy for folks. And so even if, you don't have someone facilitating that for you and you're at home, writing out what are your 3 to 5 values, and then write yourself a little declaration statement. I will live by values A, B, and C, for the next 6 to 12 months, and then come back to that in about 12 months. So those are just kind of some of the strategies that I recommend with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with the fact that they are not static. Like, I know, based on my own upbringing, like, my values now are very different than what they used to be, in terms of at least the ones that I'm aware of. And I grew up in a certain way, in a certain, like back in Argentina, within a certain family, a certain society. And I said, well, these are the things that I was taught that, like, are the things that I should care about. And then it's like, as I grow, and especially because I've done a lot of work on myself, it's like, oh, that actually is completely out of alignment. So I will, like, check this and I will bring this into my awareness and work with this. So I definitely agree with that. And I think, something else that you mentioned on that is that creating that space, that is so important. I think that I keep on sharing with everyone. One of the biggest things that we can do is creating space, just pressing pause, stopping, to be able to experience, to feel, or to just rest for a moment, so that we can take the time to reflect and to just, question what are the things that we're doing, why are we doing the things that we're doing. And it's so important to do that, because as you're talking, and you use that word thriving, well, most people are surviving, and they are not even realizing that they are in survival mode. Even people, I mean, like with privilege and with money, they are on this race and challenging a lot of times this survivalism into what does life look like if we are thriving, and what's the gap in between that we need to look into or do something about, that is taking us from this is what I am and this is life thriving. What's in between?
Yeah, absolutely. And, as you were talking about that, Brian, one of the things that comes to mind is a few years ago, I was in a place called Newfoundland. And for your listeners who aren't familiar with Newfoundland, if you go just on Google Maps, take a look, check it out. It's close to like Greenland. But anyway, I was working with this First Nations community there. And one morning, these ladies from the nation got up and they said, we're going to play the water song to start the day. And it was the most beautiful song I think I've ever heard in my life. They were from three different generations, came forward. They had three instruments and they played this water song. And just to paint a picture for your listeners here, it's as kind of like this babbling brook type idea. And then it kind of moved into this stream, and then to a small river, and then into a waterfall kind of crescendo at the end of the song. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is exactly what you just said. Like if we were to talk about what is a thriving state, it's almost like this harmonious place of living, right? Where we're fully in line with what we value, what we want. Doesn't necessarily mean we're always happy, because happiness is a bit fleeting, right? But we have purpose, fulfillment, enjoyment, connection. We have all of these things and we're living in harmony. And just like this water song, the water is going to get where it's going to go. And it's going to be a beautiful song when it gets there. It's like, how do we do that? And so I remember thinking about this song and I got up and I said, I think my work today is done. Like they painted this picture of what wellness is. Like, how do I top this? And so I think, back to your point, it's like, sometimes we overthink it too, right? It's just like, okay, what do we want? What do we value? And how do we just live in alignment with that? Trim out all the noise, whether it's on social media, the news, whatever it is, take that space, be present, self-aware with what it is that you need, and then just replicate that as many times as possible. Right. And so again, I wish I recorded that song or something, because it was the most beautiful thing, but it was really great.
Yeah. And it's one of the things that I think that a lot of times simple sometimes is the most beautiful, or the more, using the word that you say, harmonious, the more aligned way of living. Sometimes, as you're saying, we overcomplicate things. I mean, we are part of a society that taught us to do that, to think of everything and to overthink and to just be in that space of doubts and double checking everything and be like, okay, like what do I do, and all of these different things. And when we are able to connect on a deeper level, to have that space and to live a life that is aligned, it changes so much. And this is one of the things that a lot of times I share with a lot of the people that I work with is, yeah, sometimes this means changing your circumstances, or like your place of living, your relationships, your work. And also sometimes it means that doesn't change. It's just your way of approaching all of that changes. So being able to understand that, to be able to live in this thriving, like beautiful, harmonious way, doesn't mean that we need to change all of our circumstances. It's just the approach and the way that we are going about it. So I'm really interested now, as I'm sharing this, going a little bit into the topic that you've been exploring on this, like remote working and the changes that you have seen, and how can we, like bring this, what we're talking about, this aligned way, this thriving way, into this new environment that in the last couple of years, well, a lot of things changed. So What are the things that you have noticed and that you're sharing on this?
Yeah, great question. And the book, I got to say, it's very, very similar to what you were just saying. Like in the book, I talk a lot. I unpack, your energy audit is a series of questions that really gets you to understand, kind of creates that space for you to understand, okay, where's the energy going? What's filling your cup? What's taking from your cup? When do you feel the best in your days? So there's that's kind of the start of the book. I take the reader through that. One of the other things that I try to do, and the book is really built for those practical kind of strategies and tools and things like that. One of the other things that I try to do, and this is something I noticed in my own journey, is that, okay, what do I need to thrive? And I kind of wrote those things down. And similar to when I was 12 years old and I had to write down, what is it? Why am I getting these headaches? And what am I doing? I was doing a similar practice where I was saying, okay, what are the days I feel great? And there's a pattern, right? If you look at anything long enough, you can find that. And for me, I found, okay, I had to be, 30 minutes of physical activity a day was a must. Drinking 150 mils of water first thing in the morning was a must. Sleeping like this was a must. Turning my phone off at this time was a must. So I started putting all these things together, and I created what's called a 5-step energy amplifier blueprint. And it really takes the reader through a series of questions and actions for each part of their day. So they for themselves can tailor their own blueprint. So what is it that they need to blueprint their best days? And then to replicate that day in and day out. And that's really what it's all about, right? What works for you and what works for you may not work for me, right? And so it was a really nice tool to kind of put it into clear form for folks out there, regardless of where you're at in the world, to really be able to do that assessment. Everybody has a morning, everybody has an evening, everybody has your day, right? But it's like, what are you doing and where's your energy going in that? And is it bringing you joy and fulfillment and purpose, or is it taking away? And so that's something that I really talk a lot about. One of the things I've noticed as well, Brian, is, and we're a bit further along here now with the pandemic and whatnot, but really early on, there was a lot of conversation about boundaries. And it's like, okay, well, what is a boundary now, right? You're working at home. Like my office is literally 20 feet that way, for your listeners that are watching this. But, so for me, I had to have these psychological cues in terms of when are these boundaries, like when am I on work? When am I husband? When am I business owner type thing? And so for me, I had to establish those. And the one cue that I had that was most important, other than shutting the laptop at the end of the day, was the turning off of the light. So as soon as I turned off the light, it psychologically told me, I'm done for the day. And now I can be present in the kitchen or making meals or whatever I need to do around the house and be here with my wife. And so I talk a lot about that with the reader as well, to really establish clear boundaries for yourself. Because I think early on, a lot of people were looking to the government to do that. I know there are some countries doing it. Like France came out really early on, the no email after 7 p.m. thing. Portugal did that. Ontario, Canada did something kind of similar. But my rationale is you can't wait for someone else to do this for you. You know what I mean? Like back to our early conversation on wellness being valued in society. Well, not every government in every country is going to have that, right? So, what is it that you need as that freelancer, that remote worker, that's going to allow you to work in this optimal space and to thrive in that way, but also be present at home? And so that was a really big piece that I noticed early on. And I think one of the other things, just to squeeze this in real quick, was the idea that I think a lot of times over the last couple of years, we've confused communication and connection. So we're communicating more than ever, right? Like emails, text messages, Instagram, Twitter, like you name it. I mean, there's communication, and remote work was carrying a lot of the backbone of a lot of economies. And there's a lot of communication happening. But, we cannot lose connection at the same time. And I think that that's going to be the biggest challenge now coming out, is how do we continue to have these remote and hybrid work environments, but not lose connection and authentically celebrate milestones together, authentically be empathetic with each other, understand each other. I think there's still ways to do that. I mean, even you and me, I feel like we've really just connected here and beforehand and in other calls as well. And then there's communication in between that. You know what I mean? So I think that making sure that we don't lose that, and teams don't lose that, and we don't lose that as social beings, is going to be really, really important coming out of this. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I have been using for perhaps the last 6 years or so co-working spaces, and mostly I could work from home. Like I'm like today I'm working from home. I don't mind working from home. I like it, and at the same time, as you're saying, that connection is so important, and to be able to go to a space that there's other people working on their own stuff, yet we can connect, we can chat, like I can do my work and then I can see them, and how that place of connection, sometimes it's so important, the in-person contact. Like I know, I grew up in Argentina. We hug and we kiss when we say goodbye, when we say hello, and that aspect of during the pandemic of you need to keep your distance, for example, like okay, that is something that was missed in this. That is that connection that we need, and not just like from a psychological standpoint, also like from a physiological standpoint, on a physical standpoint, what we need as humans to have that connection. And I think that it's so important for for people to understand, like what are the needs, what are the things that we need. And as you're saying, with boundaries, yes, it's important, like perhaps you're not ready, or perhaps you are afraid or you're scared or certain things. And it's like, well, take care of yourself as well, like trust in yourself, put that boundary up, and perhaps not doing things. And I think that it's such an interesting conversation a lot of times with boundaries. I have been hearing this a lot in the last couple of years, like boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. Most people have no idea how to set their boundaries because they don't understand what's important for them. And then it's that communication aspect of, okay, now if I understand what's important, how do I want to experience my day, then what do I need to communicate to others so that they understand, okay, I'm putting this boundary up, like, and it's like, okay, if you're working and it's not good for me to keep on answering emails after 7 p.m. or using my computer after 7 p.m., then I need to communicate to others like, hey, this is what supports me to stay well. So I'm not going to check my emails. Don't call me, like unless it's an emergency or something, telling others what is suitable for us to be able to be well and to thrive. And I think that is so important to be able to understand as well, like for ourselves, and to share with others. Okay, this is the way that is supporting me at this moment, and that might change, but at this moment this helps. And also I want Ryan to touch on something that you were talking about, because I talk a lot with my students about compartmentalizing, and how do we, what's the approach with that? Because for me, there's only one life. There's no such thing as compartmentalizing. And at the same time, I understand, okay, at certain points, there's different roles, or there's different things that need to get done. So what's the approach that I'm going to give that to understand, well, there's no such thing as, like as a work Brian, or a house Brian, or a weekend Brian, and a holiday Brian. There's only one Brian. And I'm navigating all through that. So I need to understand, okay, I'm all of that. And at the same time, okay, from this time to this time, I have this meeting. So I need to show up to that meeting in a certain way. So what do I need to do in order to actually show up fully to what I'm supposed to be doing now, or what I'm choosing to do now, which is, and now I'm talking to you. So I knew, okay, from this time to this time, I'm talking with Ryan. I need to show up in that way. So whatever came before, I allow myself to, in a sense, process it, integrate it. And if I didn't finish that, it's like, okay, press pause. I'm showing up fully here, and then I'll show up for what needs to come after this. So what do you have anything to share or expand around that topic of compartmentalizing?
Yeah, great question. I think it's so different for each individual. And the way I kind of look at it is like, uh, there's a bit like things are going to kind of permeate, right? Like you're going to kind of have things come in and come out of your day. And one of the things I talk about in the book is, mitigating distractions, right? So early on, there was a common misconception that, oh, you're working from home, you're not going to have those distractions you have at the office. Well, that's a little false, right? Like you got Amazon coming to the door, you got the fire alarm going off, you got the dog at your feet, you got all these things. So it's like, how do you be present, deliver on what you need to deliver, and then kind of move on to the next thing? It's very challenging, right? And so navigating those is, I think, one thing. How do you make sure that you're mitigating as many distractions as possible? I think that's important. Another thing that I've been a big advocate on is like, we're really in a science experiment. It's like, for how many years did we sit in schools and it was the same? And now all of a sudden, we have this explosion of online learning, at high school, now obviously at university. And it wasn't that it wasn't there before the pandemic, but I mean, my wife just finished her master's and she barely went to campus. So, we're really in the science experiment on figuring this out. And I think we need to be easy on ourselves and remember that we're only kind of 2 years in. And, some of it's going to take us time as a society to really figure that out. You know, are we wearing these different hats, or are we, like you mentioned, there's one Brian and there's only so much of Brian and there's only so much of Ryan. And so, I guess to bring it back, one of the things that I've mentioned, and this is in my other book, is this yes, no equation that just, again, permeates through our lives. And that, sometimes when we think about it, everything that we say yes to, we're inadvertently potentially saying no to something else. And so again, if you come back to those values, and it's a decision between answering that email at 7:10 p.m. Or not answering that email at 7:10 p.m., I come back to my values to think, okay, well, have I delivered and have I added value to this today? If I have, then for me, I step away, right? If I can, I try to step away. But each person is going to have to cross that chasm as they feel comfortable with. And I think that, another factor to think about here is also this idea of imposter syndrome, right? And this is something that I unpack a little bit in my book. And I reference Daniel Goleman, who does some amazing work on this out of Harvard. But the idea that we feel like we're not enough, even though there's not sufficient evidence saying that we are not enough. You know what I mean? And I think sometimes it can be this slippery slope where it's like, okay, if I just do this one last thing, if I just do this one last thing, if I just do this, but then one of the strategies I've used to kind of park that or check imposter syndrome in my own life as a remote worker has been to ask myself this simple question: have I added value today? And if I've added value to the market today, if I've added value to my job, I've added value to my business, whatever it is, then I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable and I know, okay, you know what, this can wait till tomorrow. So I obviously don't live in like an urgent, I don't live in the urgent and important matrix that Stephen Covey talks about. I'm very privileged for that. But that's one thing that I've really had to ask myself is, are we struggling with these boundaries because we feel like we need to do more and we need to do more, or are there other reasons there? So for anyone out there that potentially is struggling with that, that's one thing that I've really asked myself is, okay, reminding ourselves to be patient. It's a bit of a science experiment. We're figuring this out. There's going to be tension and turbulence along the way. And also, what are you doing every day that adds value? And then putting your head on the pillow at night knowing, okay, you know what? I added value today. And that's the most important thing, regardless of, all the other performance metrics out there, right? So, yeah, I don't know if that helps, but that's just something I was thinking about as you mentioned that.
Yeah, no, and I mean, it's so interesting, this notion of being enough, because as we've been talking, we've been conditioned in so many ways to believe that we're not, and that we need to all of the time do things and do things and do things to prove either to others or to ourselves, like that performance is like, and that whatever success might look like, it's like we're always striving for that and not understanding that we are enough already. And yes, we can do things, and at the same time, we're enough. So it's just working with that. And Ryan, I'm aware that we're getting towards the end of this conversation. So based on the perhaps even reiterating or saying something new that you haven't shared yet, what's one thing that you'd like to share with our audience in terms of how to be well and how to live in that life that is thriving?
Yeah, good question, Brian. I think if there's one piece of advice, I would say coming back to our values. Like, it's something that I've talked about extensively in the other book, but it really does come down to that, because with remote workers, whether you're in freelance or you work for a big company or a small company, we're not getting these kind of physical interactions necessarily anymore. And you kind of got to be your own advocate. And, there's a lot of pressure out there, and unless you can be really clear on kind of what you value in terms of your time and your energy, it can be really, really hard. And so, I think figuring that out is a first step for folks. And then figuring out how, like, taking a look at your days, taking a look at your energy, and where is it going? And is there anything in my day that needs to be changed, moved, mitigated, whatever, if it's distractions? What noise is potentially taking away from me? I think those are really good questions to ask yourself. And another thing is, there's my book, but there's so many books out there. And this is one of the things I've also advocated on, that, when I talk about my book, I'm like, don't just buy mine, like Daniel Goleman has some amazing work around emotional intelligence, talks a little bit about imposter syndrome. There's some other really good research out there. There's emerging work coming out that's going to continue to support remote workers. So I would say, yeah, continue to read, continue to be aware and in tune with what you need and what you value. And I think you'll be just fine.
Beautiful. And to add to that, I think that as well, one of the key things for me with this is as well, it's not just about reading. Like, reading and getting inspiration is great. We actually need to implement that into our lives. This is why, conscious action. It's not just about raising our awareness or learning more. It's about putting that into action. So, as you're saying, figuring out what are those values, what are the ways that we want to live, and actually doing that. And as well, one of the things on top of that I want to share in terms of this connection that we're talking about, we don't need to do everything alone, everything by ourselves. I think that we've been taught a lot to do that, to try to make everything. And so, well, we can ask for support, whether that is to our family members, if you have a partner, or finding, someone to work with, which is what I end up doing a lot, like people working with me, partly because I'm there just supporting them. And that's something that they need to make things happen and to create those changes to actually live the life that they want. Because sometimes we need that. We need someone else to be there for us. So yeah, as you were saying, that I was like, yeah, like I think that's an important thing for everyone listening to as well now.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Navy SEALs have the swim buddy concept, right? Where you're never fully alone. And who is your swim buddy? And I think that's an important question to ask. And I know there's a lot of really good books out there, but there's another really good one I got to mention. I just read it. It was called, I think it's The Art of Groundedness, or How to Be More Grounded, by Brad Stauber. Anyway, very fascinating. He talks about this idea, similar to what you were just mentioning, Brian, around basically a heroic individualism, right? Where we put all this pressure on ourselves to deliver and be our own hero, right? With everything that we touch and everything that we do, but we don't have to go in it alone. And I love what you said about conscious action, right? There needs to be, you can be aware, conscious, but you need to be able to act. And I think that is, over time, what sets people up for success in their personal lives and in their vocation. Absolutely.
Beautiful. So, Ryan, before we end, where can people find you, and how could people potentially work with you, or where can they find your books?
Yeah, so the best place for finding my books is definitely on Amazon. So you can just go on there and search Ryan Fahey, and you'll find them all there. In terms of my connecting with me personally, I'm a big advocate for LinkedIn. So you can connect with me, just Ryan B. Fahey on LinkedIn. And then you can also, I think my website is on there as well, just faheyconsulting.org, and always open to having more conversations around this type of topic. And yeah, looking forward to connecting with folks.
Beautiful. And we'll have all of those links on the show notes so that people can find it easy. Thank you, Ryan, so much for taking the time, for sharing with us, and for everyone listening. I hope that something resonated with you. And if something did resonate with you, let us know. Like, write a comment. I would love the conversation to keep on happening. And it's not just us talking. This is about creating conversation. So if there's anything that you'd like to share or ask with us, please do so in the comments. So thank you, Ryan, once again for being here with us.
Yeah, and thank you, Brian, and thanks for everyone for tuning in here today and taking time out of your day to have a listen.
Beautiful. And thanks, everyone. And we'll see you on the next episode. Bye.
What did you like the most about this episode? Take a moment to think about what change you can make in your life today.
Share your conscious action on social media using #ConsciousAction and tagging @ConsciousActionNZ so we can celebrate your impact on the world and create a ripple effect.
One easy action we would love for you to take right now is to share, like, and subscribe to this podcast. This will help us get these messages out into the world and inspire more people to take conscious action in their own lives, contributing to the better world we hope for.